Reviews are already out there flying, and one thing has been constant. Shadow of the Erdtree is much more difficult than the base game, as we all expected, of course. There will surely be very OP and powerful meta weapons in the DLC that might as well redefine the meta, but for now, you are going to need to have such meta at hand to be able to breeze through the DLC. Over the course of these past few days, I have been posting the most powerful and meta weapons and builds, so if you're up to date, you're good to go. This is just a recap of the 5 most OP broken meta weapons and builds in the game that we have posted. That said, there's a link in the video description as well for a more detailed version on spells, buffs, crystal tiers, playstyles, so on and so forth for each and every single one of these weapons. For now, we will stick to talking about the strength, weaknesses, what can they do for you, what kind of playstyle can you expect out of them, and what is the best one of them all. One constant, though, is that properly buff each and every single one of these builds. Weapons are going to be dealing 5k per hit, and I mean that as a minimum, because some of these weapons are going to exceed that by much more damage. Now, starting off with the Sword of Night and Flame. Forgotten by many since the launch of the game because it was immediately one of the very first weapons to be nerfed on launch, it got buffed again, close to its original power back in patch 109. It has 2 stances for the Ash of War. A magic beam, single target burst, and a huge fire AoE that can clear enemies in a wide arc like 50 miles away from you. The cool thing about this weapon is that you can change and alter the build buff damage to deal more damage to fire and magic weak enemies, and vice versa depending on your choice. Both Ashes of War deal 5k damage per hit, provided that you buff the weapon accordingly to situation, and the regular fire Ash of War is one of the best ways to explore the overworld because you don't give a damn about it getting muffed. The only downside is that to deal the full damage and potential, you do have to be point blank on the face of the enemies because the weapon has a blade hitbox detection on the Ash of War, and unfortunately it doesn't have hyper armor whatsoever, so you're going to have to be mindful about that. You do have to have a base poise into your character builds to be doing such a thing. Anyways, you can still use it from far away from a safe distance. You can, but it's still going to deal like 3k damage. It's just that you are negating that little extra 2k damage from the blade detection and all of the buffing. So that's one thing to have in mind. Then we have the Bolt of Gransax, a personal favorite. This was my very first playthrough main weapon, and as such it holds a very close special place in my heart. It's the sniper of the game. You have the potential and capability of dealing 5k damage that we mentioned, but from 200 miles away from the enemies. It doesn't have huge poise damage, so you're likely not going to be staggering and landing critical hits with this weapon, which would be irrelevant because the overall idea is to be far away from the enemy, and if you stagger something, you will need to run towards it, and you're not going to reach them in time to do the riposte. However, it does cause knockdown, so it will push back enemies with every hit, especially useful against bosses like Millennia, for example. It can also be used very defensively by poking from behind a shield, because this is a spear. So it doesn't matter if the enemy gets too close to you, you always have means of fighting back. Now the Moonlight's Blade, oh boy, what is not to love about this thing? There has always been an iteration of this weapon, a rendition of this weapon in each Souls game, and it's always very powerful. The highlights right here is that it has a very low FP consumption, because how it works is that you use the Ash of War to buff the weapon, and then you charge heavy attacks to deal damage. The thing is that it also has incredible range. It has this incredible range in AoE kind of area in front of you. It has multiple ways of buffing it, so for example you can be using Scorpion Charms, you can be using Terra Magica, Crystal Tears. There's many ways that you can buff the damage of this thing, all the way to potentialize even 150% more damage. And it also, if you're not just happy enough with that, is that it causes frostbite. Frostbite also causes for the enemies to receive 20% more damage. So with this weapon you have low FP consumption, you have huge range, you have a cool kind of looking type of weapon. It's always glowing, and the ways of buffing it, it's just nuts. This weapon is just so broken. Now, I had a little bit of an issue trying to decide which one of these weapons was going to be in the first place. Let's begin with the second, and then we'll move on from there. Morgwyn Sacred Spear, the cheesiest weapon in the game. It inflicts bleeding, the best status ailment in the entirety of the game. The Ash of War has an insane amount of range, one of the longest. It can be used from behind walls to cheese enemies as well. It also works, the damage that you deal from like 50 miles away, it's in a 360 humongous radius, so goodbye to getting muffed. The Ash of War deals an insulting amount of damage on itself, besides being able to proc bleeding as well. So the bleeding, it's almost guaranteed, provided that the enemy that you're fighting against actually does bleed. You are going to have a guaranteed bleeding twice at least on each one of the every time that you do the 3 ticks animation of this thing. But that is not all. Like I mentioned, the base Ash of War without the bleeding on itself, it just deals a filthy amount of damage. Completing the 3 ticks animation of the Ash of War can deal up to 20k damage to some enemies and also bosses as well, so you can by all means delete and laser the hell bar of some bosses with just the 3 ticks of this thing right here. It has a decent hyper armor, which you can combine and stack with the poise of your character that the character already has. Most of its damage comes from fire, one of the best damage types in the entirety of the game that can be buffed to filthy levels as well. Honestly, when you're struggling against any boss in the game, just spam this and you're quite literally killing anything in front of you without having to block, dodge, nor do anything. Just one button and that's it. That's how good this weapon. First place doesn't deal nearly as close as damage as in the range in AoE is not as good as the Morgwyn Sacred Spear. Then why is it better? Well, simply because it's on par with it. It heals you every time you hit something. So Crimson Flasks, while exploring, they become kinda useless. If you hit 10 enemies in the huge wave in front of you, it will heal you for each and every single one of those enemies that the wave touches. And the healing is not just something small. It heals you for like 1/4 of your health. And if you're not happy with that, anytime something dies in front of you, it heals you as well. And you don't actually have to have the weapon equipped, so you can have it as a side little something. And it doesn't, it doesn't have nearly as good damage as this Morgwyn Sacred Spear, but it makes up with the utility and how useless you can be as a player to succeed with this weapon. Also, the range of the waves, it travels like 200 miles away in front of you as well, so you don't really have to be close to kill things and heal you by killing things. More often than not, the wave is going to stagger the enemy when you use it, so in a sense it's actually better than using the Crimson Tears, because it gives you some kind of defense and offense at the same time that you are healing. Now, I still think that they are pretty much on par because of the utility that this weapon has. It can be very well outclassed by the damage Morgwyn Spear can deal. You can quite literally just enter the boss fight and start pressing the Ash of War button, and everything is likely going to die without you having to care at all if you're using Morgwyn Sacred Spear. So, the only reason I personally, in my very own bias, have the Blasphemous Blade in the first place is because of weapon design. It's just one of the best designs in the game. I mean, yeah, the Crimson Fire that Morgwyn Spear has, it's cool and all, but it's just like these boring tridents. There's nothing special about it. Now, the Blasphemous Blade has those disgusting, unsettling, uncomfortable to watch little bloody serpenty arms reaching out to you. So if it's so powerful, it's because it probably quite literally is like 100 arms of this little dude's hands touching the enemy, and they die of discomfort.
My hand! Ah! Come on! You're gonna fall unless you take my hand! No.
Anyways, those are the best and most OP and broken builds you should take into your journey to the Shadowlands. If you like the content, like and very super appreciated, and also if they are good just a beautiful person, you're indeed a good just a beautiful person, join the Discord. I'll be playing lots of Elden Ring right there. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. I'll be seeing you beautiful people in the next one. Have a lovely day, goodbye.